Welcome to our deep dive into the hidden world of plant communication. You've sent in excerpts from Suzanne Simard's book, Finding the Mother Tree.
Okay.
And we'll be focusing on chapter 7, where she really gets into the mind-blowing ways plants talk to each other.
Yeah.
And, it goes way beyond just a simple, hey, watch out for that caterpillar.
What's so fascinating about this chapter is how it challenges our perception of plants as passive beings.
Right.
We'll be diving into how they actively shape their environment.
Okay.
Through complex chemical signaling, forming alliances, defending themselves, and even, as Simard suggests, manipulating other species for their own benefit.
Manipulating plants. Okay, I need to hear more about this.
Yeah.
For a long time, the research was all about those basic alarm calls, right?
Right.
Like a tree sending out a warning signal when it's under attack.
Exactly.
But Simard paints a much richer picture of communication going on.
Exactly. And as researchers like Consuelo de Moraes, an ecologist featured in the book,
Okay.
who are really uncovering these intricate interactions.
What?
One of her most intriguing observations involves bumblebees.
Okay.
You wouldn't believe what they do to get their food.
Okay, now you've got me hooked.
Okay.
Tell me, what's the deal with these bumblebees?
Well, picture this early spring.
Okay.
The bees are hungry, but the flowers aren't quite blooming yet.
Mm-hmm.
The Moros noticed that these desperate bumblebees would actually bite the leaves of black mustard plants.
What?
And get this, those plants would then bloom up to a month earlier than usual.
So the bees essentially force the plants to bloom early
Yeah.
so they can get their nectar fix.
All right.
But wouldn't that be harmful to the plant?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
While it might seem like the bees are taking advantage,
Right.
it's actually a mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay.
The plants, by blooming early, get a head start on pollination
Oh.
and potentially avoid competition with other species later in the season.
It's almost like the bees are giving the plants a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Like, hey, time to get a move on. Spring is here.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this example perfectly illustrates what Simard calls multi-species muddles.
Okay.
The idea that everything in nature is interconnected and affects everything else.
Right.
It's not just about individual species, but about the complex web of relationships between them.
And those relationships aren't always sunshine and roses, right?
Right.
Sometimes it feels more like a battle for survival out there.
You're absolutely right. De Moraes describes it as an arms race,
Okay.
with plants, insects, and even viruses constantly evolving strategies to outsmart each other.
Wow.
Take bittersweet nightshade, for example.
Hmm.
It secretes nectar to attract ants as a defense mechanism.
So the ants get a sugary treat, and in return they act as bodyguards for the plant,
Yeah.
protecting it from pesky flea beetles. That's a pretty sweet deal, literally.
Yes. But then you have cases where the deal seems a bit more one-sided.
Okay.
Legumes, for instance, form a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in their roots. The bacteria provide the plant with essential nutrients. But if they aren't producing enough nitrogen, the legume can actually punish them by restricting their oxygen supply.
Wow. That takes tough love to a whole new level. So even in these seemingly cooperative relationships,
Right.
there's a power dynamic at play.
Yeah.
It really makes you question where collaboration ends and manipulation begins.
And perhaps the most striking example of this blurred line is found in the world of orchids.
Okay.
Some species, particularly in Australia,
Uh,
have developed a fascinating, albeit deceptive, pollination strategy.
okay. Orchids already have that mysterious beauty thing going on. What
Yeah.
kind of deception are we talking about here?
Well, these orchids have evolved to mimic the appearance and scent of female wasps to attract males for pollination.
Hold on. They're using their looks and smells to trick wasps. That's incredible. It's like they've hacked the wasp dating app,
Yes.
but how do they pull it off?
It all comes down to their mastery of chemistry.
Okay.
These orchids synthesize specific blends of compounds, many of which are still unknown to science,
Wow.
to create a pheromone cocktail that's irresistible to male wasps.
So it's not just the simple smell like a female wasp situation.
Right.
It's a highly sophisticated and targeted chemical strategy.
Yeah.
But if the wasps aren't actually mating with these orchids, aren't they just being exploited?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
While it might look like straightforward deception from our perspective,
Mm-hmm.
some researchers argue that there might be benefits for both parties.
Oh.
Maybe it's more like a mutually enjoyable interaction, even if it's not traditional reproduction.
It makes you wonder if our human concepts of deception and exploitation really apply in the natural world,
Right.
where relationships can be so complex and nuanced.
Exactly. It challenges our assumptions about how different species interact and what we consider natural behavior.
Yeah.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, Simard also touches on something I've always wondered about.
Okay.
The role of beauty in the plant world. Is there a scientific reason for the vibrant colors and patterns we see in flowers? Or is it purely aesthetic?
I've always wondered the same thing. It seems like there must be more to it than just looking pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, nature doesn't usually do things without a purpose, right?
You're right to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Wall Kimmer, a botanist who Simard mentions, explored this very question by studying asters and goldenrod, two wildflowers that often grow together.
Ah, yes, those beautiful bursts of purple and gold you see in meadows in the fall. What did Kimmerer find?
She discovered that when these plants bloom side by side, they attract significantly more pollinators than when they're isolated. It's like your combined color display creates a more powerful visual signal, attracting a larger audience of bees and butterflies.
So it's not just about individual beauty, but about the collective impact of colors and patterns.
Yeah.
It's like a symphony of colors working together to achieve a specific goal pollination.
Precisely, and this suggests that the beauty we perceive might actually be a deliberate strategy, a way for plants to maximize their chances of reproduction by attracting pollinators more effectively.
It's fascinating to think that the aesthetic beauty we appreciate in nature might have evolved for a practical reason. But sadly, Simard also talks about how this intricate communication can be disrupted by human activities, specifically pollution. I have a feeling this is where things take a bit of a darker turn.
You're right. Unfortunately, human actions are creating a lot of noise that interferes with these delicate conversations happening in the plant world. Jarmo Holopainen, a researcher focusing on plant volatiles, discovered that even everyday levels of ozone and carbon dioxide can disrupt the way plants communicate.
So we're essentially drowning out or scrambling those chemical messages, making it harder for plants to talk to each other.
Yeah.
How exactly does that work?
Well, think of it this way. Pollution can limit the distance those chemical signals can travel.
Okay.
It can also scramble the messages, making them harder to decipher.
Right.
And in some cases, it can even cause plants to close their stomata. Tiny pores on their leaves, which are essential for both sending and receiving those volatile signals.
It's like trying to have a conversation in a noisy room where you can barely hear each other and then someone slams the door shut. No wonder these plants are having trouble communicating. What are the consequences of this communication breakdown?
The consequences can be significant.
Okay.
Without those vital signals, plants may struggle to defend themselves effectively against pests, which can lead to outbreaks and crop failures.
Wow.
It also disrupts the delicate balance of ecosystems as those mutually beneficial relationships we talked about earlier start to break down.
It's a sobering thought that not only are we polluting the air we breathe, but we're also disrupting the communication networks that plants rely on for survival. And it all comes back to us, right? We're part of this interconnected web.
Exactly.
And our actions have ripple effects we might not even realize.
That's exactly the point Simard is making. But thankfully, she also explores some potential solutions, ways we can learn from plants and their communication strategies to create a more sustainable future.
Okay.
We'll delve into those solutions further in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm definitely ready for some good news after that. This has been an absolutely eye-opening exploration into the secret language of plants. But before we move on, is there a key takeaway you want to leave our listener with from this first part?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the plant world is far more complex and communicative than we often realize. And the more we learn about their language, the more we understand how interconnected we all are and how much we depend on their well-being.
Well said. We'll be back soon to explore those solutions and the implications for our future. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating world of plant communication. We've been exploring how plants use chemical signals to form alliances, defend themselves, and even in some cases manipulate other species to their advantage. But as we touched on in the last part, human activities are creating a lot of noise that's disrupting these subtle conversations.
It's like we've stumbled into a bustling marketplace full of chatter and activity, and we're just starting to understand the language being spoken. But then suddenly loud music starts blaring, making it difficult to hear those nuanced conversations. That's essentially what pollution is doing to the plant world.
Right. We talked about how smog and other pollutants can drown out or scramble those vital chemical messages, making it harder for plants to communicate effectively. And that can have serious consequences, like pest outbreaks and crop failures.
But it's not just pollution that's disrupting plant communication. our modern agricultural practices themselves might be playing a role in ways we're only beginning to understand.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How is agriculture impacting the way plants communicate?
Well, consider the vast monocultures we create with industrial farming. Huge fields, planted with a single crop, often genetically identical. It's a far cry from the diversity and complexity of a natural forest or meadow.
So are you saying these monocultures are like silent deserts where plants can't talk to each other? Like they're missing out on those lively conversations that would naturally be happening?
In a sense, yes. Research has shown that some domesticated crops, like certain varieties of corn, have a limited ability to produce those volatile signals that warn their neighbors about pests or attract beneficial predators. It's like they've lost their voice, or maybe never fully developed it in the first place.
That makes sense. If they're bred for high yield and uniformity, maybe those defense mechanisms aren't seen as essential. It's like we've created a society of plants that are reliant on us for protection rather than their own natural defenses.
Exactly. And that's why we see such heavy reliance on pesticides in conventional agriculture. We've essentially disrupted the natural balance and then stepped in with chemical interventions to try to control it.
It's a vicious cycle. But thankfully, Simard highlights the work of scientists who are looking to break this cycle by learning from the plants that have retained their communication skills, like the tomato plant, which we talked about earlier.
Yes, the tomato is a true champion of communication. It releases a complex blend of volatiles that attract parasitic wasps to control pests, and even warns its neighbors about impending threats. It's a master of chemical signaling.
It's like the town crier shouting out warnings and rallying the troops. And scientists are now exploring how to harness this knowledge to develop crops that are better at defending themselves naturally right.
Absolutely. One approach is to breed crops with enhanced volatile production, essentially amplifying their ability to call for help. Imagine equipping that town crier with a megaphone so their message can reach even further.
That's a great analogy. Are there any other specific examples of how we're learning from plant communication to improve agriculture?
There are many exciting developments in this field. For instance, researchers are looking at how to incorporate a specific terpene from lima beans, which is known to attract parasitic wasps, into rice plants.
So essentially giving rice plants a new weapon in their arsenal against pests. That's incredibly promising, especially considering how important rice is as a staple crop for billions of people.
Exactly. And it highlights the potential for using plant communication to create more sustainable and resilient agricultural systems. It's not just about protecting individual plants, but about strengthening entire ecosystems by fostering those beneficial relationships we talked about.
And that brings us back to companion planting, which Simard also discusses in the book. It's this fascinating practice of intentionally pairing plants that naturally complement each other, not just in terms of their physical needs, but also their communication styles.
You're exactly right. Remember the classic example of strawberries and borage? The borage attracts pollinators that benefit the strawberries, leading to higher yields and better quality fruit. It's a win-win situation.
It's a beautiful example of how observing and understanding nature's own solutions can lead to more sustainable practices. But is companion planting practical for industrial agriculture? Can we really scale up something that seems so nuanced and tailored to specific plant relationships?
That's the million-dollar question. As you pointed out, industrial agriculture is deeply invested in monocultures and standardized practices. Shifting to a more diverse and nuanced approach would require a fundamental change in our thinking and our systems. It would mean moving away from the idea of controlling nature and towards a more collaborative and respectful approach.
It's like we need to learn to speak the language of nature, not just try to shout over it with our machinery and chemicals. And listening to plants, understanding their communication strategies is a crucial step in that direction.
Well said. It's about recognizing that we're part of the ecosystem, not separate from it. And as we delve deeper into the world of plant communication, we start to see the intelligence and agency of these beings, their role in creating a healthy and balanced planet.
This is all so inspiring, but it also feels a bit overwhelming. Like where do we even begin to apply these principles in our everyday lives? Are there small changes we can make that can actually make a difference?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at how understanding plant communication can inform our choices as consumers, gardeners, and citizens. How we can all become more fluent in the language of plants, starting right where we are.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the amazing world of plant communication. We've journeyed through how plants talk, how human actions can interfere, and the potential for positive change. We've uncovered some incredible insights so far, but now the question is, How do we as individuals actually plug into this conversation? It's one thing to understand the science, but how do we apply it to our everyday lives?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
We often get caught up in thinking about large-scale solutions,
Right.
but it's important to remember that individual actions, when multiplied, create a powerful ripple effect.
Okay.
Each of us can become more fluent in the language of plants, starting right where we are.
So what does that look like practically? I'm picturing myself trying to whisper sweet nothings to my houseplants, hoping they'll send out those good vibes to their neighbors. But seriously, it feels a bit daunting to go from learning about plant volatiles to actually applying that knowledge in a meaningful way.
It starts with a shift in awareness.
Right.
Recognizing that even the smallest patch of green,
Okay.
a potted herb on your windowsill, a few flowers in a balcony planter, is part of this intricate web of communication. The choices you make about what you grow, how you grow it, and even what you buy can contribute to a healthier plant world.
Okay, let's break that down. You mentioned choices about what we grow. Does that mean ditching those perfectly manicured lawns and planting a wildflower meadow instead? I mean, that would be amazing, but it's not exactly feasible for everyone.
A wildflower meadow is certainly a fantastic way to support biodiversity and create a haven for pollinators.
Right.
But you don't need a huge space to make a difference. Even if you're just working with a small garden or a few containers, you can choose native plants over exotic species. They're better adapted to your local environment and provide food and habitat for native insects and birds, many of which play a crucial role in pollination and pest control.
Right. It's about creating those multi-species muddles we talked about, fostering those beneficial relationships that already exist in nature. It's not about forcing something unnatural, but about working with the natural flow of communication and interaction.
Exactly. And remember those companion planting strategies we discussed. You can apply those principles even in a small space, intentionally pairing plants that support each other, observing how they interact.
Yeah.
It's a fun and rewarding way to engage with the language of plants firsthand.
It's like creating mini ecosystems right in your own backyard where plants can thrive and communicate effectively. But what about those of us who don't have a green thumb or even a patch of dirt to call our own? Are there other ways to participate in this conversation?
Absolutely. Our choices as consumers have a huge impact. Supporting local farmers markets and choosing organic produce is a powerful way to vote with your wallet. Organic farming practices tend to be less disruptive to those natural communication pathways as they avoid the use of synthetic pesticides that can scramble those vital messages.
So it's about aligning our spending habits with our values.
Right.
Supporting businesses and practices that prioritize sustainability and ecological balance. It's about recognizing that every purchase is a vote for the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. And beyond our food choices, we can be mindful of the products we use in our homes and gardens. Look for natural alternatives to chemical-laden cleaning products and pesticides. Remember, those plant volatiles are sensitive to pollution, even in small amounts.
You know, it's amazing how interconnected everything is. We've talked about smog, but you're saying even those air fresheners we use might be interfering with those subtle plant conversations happening right in our own homes.
It's true, everything is connected. But while individual actions are important, you're right, they might not feel sufficient to address those larger systemic issues like pollution, climate change, and industrial agriculture.
That's what's been on my mind. I feel inspired to make changes in my own life, but I also wonder, is it enough?
Right.
How do we create those bigger shifts that are so desperately needed?
You're hitting on a crucial point. While individual actions alone won't solve these complex problems, they can contribute to a collective shift in consciousness, a groundswell of demand for change.
So it's not about feeling like you have to single-handedly save the planet,
Right.
but about being part of a larger movement. It's about making informed choices, educating yourself and others, and advocating for policies that support a healthier planet for both plants and people.
Exactly. Support organizations working to protect biodiversity, promote sustainable agriculture, and reduce pollution.
Sure.
Speak up, share your knowledge, and inspire others to listen to the voices of the plant world.
It all comes back to that core message, recognizing that plants are not just passive scenery in our world. They're active participants, intelligent beings with their own complex communication networks.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to listen to them, learn from them, and protect them.
Beautifully said. And perhaps the most important thing we can do is to cultivate a sense of wonder and respect for the natural world. Slow down, observe, listen. You might be surprised by what you discover when you tune in to the subtle conversations happening all around you.
This has been such an incredible journey into the fascinating world of plant communication. Thank you for guiding us through this exploration. And to our listener, thank you for sending in this incredible book. It's truly opened our eyes to a whole new dimension of nature's intelligence.
It's been a pleasure. As you venture out into the world armed with this new knowledge, I encourage you to pay attention. The plants are speaking. Are you listening?
That's a question we should all ask ourselves. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep